And this is the age of the autonomous people transporter, better known as the APT. Previously, people that transported in automobiles or cars. The APT is biomolecular, and that simply means that it's made up of living cells that replicate and self-repair. For example, if the skin or the outer shell of the APT is torn, it will self-repair. If a structural member gets a fracture, it will self-repair. The APT was designed to be sort of a recycling system. It feeds on carbon materials, essentially food scraps. You have compostable material from your dinner. You can put those outside in an APT input vessel, and they will use that as input materials. Restaurants scrape off a lot of stuff. They put those in. Animal scraps, put those in. That's what the APT uses for input materials. The APT has a fuel converter that converts this carbon-based material into fuel for the car, for the APT, for the various components of the APT. The fuel then goes through a biomolecular tube to the various components of the APT, including the motion cells, which are used to propel the system. The APT also is neuroadaptive, meaning that it can analyze and basically think and come up with new ideas. The APT obviously communicates with other APTs. They're connected. It's like a community. They communicate on input resources, passenger pickup locations, and they also will do trains. Let's say there's 100 or a couple hundred APTs that go from Colorado Springs to Denver. These APTs can move basically as a train with millimeters of separation between them. Since they're in constant communication, they'll just move as one train from Colorado Springs to Denver. The APTs typically function for about 80 years. However, in recent times, in the last 50 years, it's been observed that some of the APTs will stop functioning at 30 years, 50 years, 60 years. The mechanics are the only ones that can administer additives to help with some of these symptoms. Some of the symptoms may be a self-repair failure to the motion cells. They'll stop, and of course then the APT can't move. Occasionally, the distributed processors within the APT will become confused, and the APT won't be able to access its navigation capabilities and will just wander around. And that's a failure of the APT. The mechanics are highly trained. Some of them have 8 years of specific training on symptoms and what additives go to those symptoms. Sometimes they'll administer an additive, and there'll be a response, a secondary response that's unwanted. So then they'll have to administer one or more additional additives to the APT to get it to run. The mechanics are highly respected in the community because of the training and because of the traveling public. They're really respected. The government supports the mechanics and the transportation. Now, I mentioned that the APTs have some analytical ability. As they look back, they were able to see a trend on these failures that I mentioned. And what they learned was that the most wealthy countries, and within those countries, the highest density populations had the highest amount of APT failures, self-repair failures. The motion cells would not repair. The neural capabilities would not repair. Upon further analysis, with the APTs, they discovered that some of these food scraps, the ones with UFOs, unidentified food objects, it could be white bread matter, it could be additives, it could be food colors, it could be synthetically derived materials that are in these foods. It could be the sugar, the salt, the oils, and all of the animal byproduct that the APTs would use as input resources that are high in saturated fat, cholesterol, and protein. And what the APTs discovered was that the biomolecular tubes would become constricted. So the fuel, after being converted from the fuel converter, would not be able to make it to the motion cells. And so the motion cells would fail. They would not have the fuel for the self-repair. Same for the neuromolecular distributed processing unit on the APTs. There's a lot of support for the current system. The federal government supports the UFO manufacturers, food manufacturers. The federal government supports the animal husbandry business. And as I mentioned, the mechanics are highly respected individuals. And the federal government supports the transportation and subsidizes the repair of the APTs. I'm not going to tell you how this story ends. I wanted you to put on your 2184 imagination and come up with your own ending. I will propose 3 scenarios. Number 1, the American Mechanics Association, better known as the AMA, will begin to require training in the cause and prevention of self-repair failures. Number 2, the APTs will act as a community and sort of a grassroots effort and start feeding on clean, whole plant input materials, things growing in the fields. Or number 3, humans will invent a Star Trek-like transporter, making the APTs obsolete. Madam Postmaster.